In the summer of 1798, in a hospital in Versailles, a team of French surgeons stopped an autopsy halfway through, because not one of them could physically bear to continue. The body on the table belonged to a 26-year-old man named Tarrare, and even in death, the man who could not stop eating was more than science could stomach. What follows is a true story, or at least, as true as the 18th century allows. Nearly everything we know comes from Baron Percy, Surgeon-in-Chief of the French Revolutionary Armies and one of the most respected medical men of his age, who examined Tarrare personally over several years and published his findings. Some details were almost certainly exaggerated in the retelling, and I'll flag those moments as we reach them. But the skeleton of this story, the hunger, the experiments, the spy mission, the accusation that ended everything, sits in the medical literature to this day. Tarrare was born around 1772 in rural France, near Lyon. We don't even know if Tarrare was his real name, a surname, or a nickname that eventually swallowed the man whole. The records never say. What they do say is that by his teenage years, something inside him had gone catastrophically wrong. He was hungry. Not hungry the way a growing farm boy is hungry, hungry the way a fire is hungry. Contemporary accounts claim that as an adolescent he could eat a quarter of a bullock, a quarter of a cow's weight in beef, in a single day. His own weight at the time, barely 100 pounds. His parents faced a brutal arithmetic. They could feed their son, or they could feed themselves. They could not do both. So while still a teenager, Tarrare was turned out of his home and left to survive on the roads of pre-revolutionary France. He fell in with the kind of company the roads provided, bands of thieves, beggars, and traveling prostitutes, working his way across the countryside. Eventually he became the warm-up act for a wandering charlatan, a mountebank selling miracle cures from village to village. Tarrare's job was to draw the crowd, and he drew it the only way he could, by swallowing things. Corks, stones, live animals, whole baskets of apples, one after another, until the basket was empty and the crowd was screaming. By 1788, the year before the revolution, he had made his way to Paris and set up as a street performer in his own right. And here the story nearly ends early. After one performance, he collapsed with an acute intestinal blockage, the debris of his act jammed inside him. He was carried to the Hôtel Dieu hospital, where doctors dosed him with powerful laxatives until the obstruction finally cleared. Tarrare was so delighted with his recovery that he offered, then and there, to demonstrate his gratitude by swallowing the surgeon's watch and chain. The surgeon, a man named Giraud, declined the honor, and reportedly warned him that if he did, he would cut him open to get it back. Let's stop and look at him for a moment, because the eyewitness descriptions are among the strangest parts of this whole case. Tarrare was not a giant. He was slim, of average height, weighing around 100 pounds, with soft fair hair and an abnormally wide mouth in which, witnesses said, he could hold a dozen eggs or apples at once. His teeth were badly stained, his lips were nearly invisible. When his stomach was empty, the skin of his belly hung so slack that he could wrap it around his waist like an apron. After a meal, that same belly swelled tight as an inflated balloon. He sweated constantly. A visible vapor was said to rise off his body, and he stank. According to Percy, the smell was noticeable at 20 paces, and it grew dramatically worse after he ate. His eyes went bloodshot when he fed. When there was no food, his jaw muscles worked restlessly, and that enormous mouth hung open like something waiting. And yet, and every source agrees on this, outside of the hunger, Tarrare was not a monster. He was described as mild, apathetic, sweet-tempered, a young man people didn't hate, just pitied. The tragedy of what comes next depends on remembering that. In 1792, revolutionary France went to war with half of Europe, and Tarrare joined the army. It was, in a way, a rational decision. Soldiers were fed. But standard rations that would sustain a normal man barely touched him. He traded labor for food, doing chores for other soldiers in exchange for their portions. He scavenged gutters, refuse heaps, the leavings of the camp. It was not enough. He collapsed from exhaustion and was hospitalized, and this is where his story stops being a sideshow and becomes a medical file. At the military hospital, Tarrare was granted quadruple rations. He ate them and remained hungry. He ate the scraps left on other patients' plates. He crept into the kitchens and ate what he found there. He ate the hospital's poultices, the medicated dressings meant for wounds. The staff had never seen anything like it, and two men decided to find out how deep the anomaly went, a young surgeon named Corville, and the surgeon-in-chief, Baron Percy himself. The experiments they conducted read like fiction, and I remind you, this is Percy's own published account. They set before Tarrare a meal that had been prepared for 15 German laborers, 2 enormous meat pies, plates of grease and salt, 4 gallons of milk. He ate all of it, unassisted, in a single sitting, and immediately fell asleep, his belly stretched drum-tight. They gave him a live eel, he crushed its head between his teeth and swallowed the rest whole. He ate snakes and lizards. In the most infamous test of all, they presented him with a live cat. He consumed everything but the bones, and hours later regurgitated the fur and skin the way a bird of prey casts a pellet. Some historians suspect these scenes grew in the telling, and they may well have. But Percy signed his name to them. Then someone had an idea that could only have been born in wartime. If this man could swallow anything and carry it safely inside his body, why not documents? Corville took the scheme to the top. General Alexandre de Beauharnais, the first husband, as it happens, of the future Empress Josephine. A test was arranged. Tarrare swallowed a wooden box with a paper sealed inside. 2 days later he produced it again, the document intact and legible. The generals were satisfied. And Tarrare's payment for this audition tells you everything about how his handlers saw him, a wheelbarrow loaded with 30 pounds of raw bull's lungs and liver, which he ate on the spot, in front of the assembled officers. His first real mission was to cross enemy lines near the Rhine, disguised as a peasant, and deliver a swallowed message to a French colonel held prisoner by the Prussians. It went wrong almost immediately. Tarrare spoke no German. A slight, sweating, reeking Frenchman wandering through a war zone did not blend in. He was seized, searched, beaten, and interrogated. He held out, Percy says, for a full day, before finally revealing the secret. The Prussians waited, recovered the wooden box, opened the dispatch of this daring French courier, and found nothing. No troop movements. No ciphers. The message was a dummy, a test note asking the colonel to confirm that it had arrived. The French High Command had risked his life on a trial run. The Prussian commander was reportedly so enraged that Tarrare was marched to a gallows and made to stand through a mock execution, the noose around his neck, before being cut down at the last moment, beaten one final time, and dumped near the French lines as a message of contempt. Whether every beat of that scene is literally true, we cannot verify. What is not disputed is what it did to him. Whatever was left of Tarrare's nerve broke on that scaffold. He was done with war, done with performing, done with being a curiosity. He returned to the military hospital and begged Baron Percy for the only thing he had never had, a cure. Percy tried. Honestly, and by the standards of the 1790s, thoroughly. He dosed Tarrare with laudanum, opium. No effect. Wine vinegar. Tobacco pills. Nothing. He tried the opposite approach, flooding him with soft-boiled eggs in enormous quantities, hoping sheer volume might quiet the hunger. It did not. Nothing did. And a starving man living in a building full of the sick and the dead began to slide toward places medicine has no comfortable words for. Tarrare slipped out at night to fight stray dogs for carrion in the gutters and to eat refuse outside butchers' stalls. Inside the hospital, it got worse. He was caught drinking the blood of patients undergoing bloodletting. He was caught, more than once, in the morgue, feeding on the bodies of the dead. The other doctors were horrified and demanded he be committed to an asylum or thrown into the street. Percy, to his credit or his shame, depending on how you read it, protected him, kept him close, kept studying. Then a 14-month-old toddler disappeared from the hospital. No body was ever found. No witness ever came forward. Nothing was ever proven, then or since, and it must be said plainly that a crowded 18th century hospital was a place where the very young went missing for many reasons. But every eye turned to the man from the morgue. The staff drove Tarrare out of the building, and this time Percy did not stop them. He simply recorded, with a doctor's chill economy, that Tarrare was chased away and vanished. The accusation was never tested in any court. It just followed him out the door, and it has followed him for more than 2 centuries since. For 4 years, the record goes dark. Then, in 1798, a message reached Percy from a hospital in Versailles. A dying patient was asking for him by name. Tarrare was 26, and now something was eating him, tuberculosis. He told Percy he believed his condition had been caused by a golden fork he had swallowed 2 years earlier, still lodged somewhere inside him. He hoped the surgeons might retrieve it and save his life. It was the hope of a man who had spent his whole existence being told his body was a container. A month later, after a wretched decline, Tarrare died. The autopsy was performed by Monsieur Tessier, chief surgeon of Versailles, and it answered questions doctors had been asking for years. Tarrare's gullet was abnormally vast. When his jaws were forced open, the surgeons could reportedly see straight down into his stomach, as if peering into a broad open canal. The stomach itself was enormous, ulcerated, and filled almost the whole of his abdomen. His liver and gallbladder were grotesquely oversized. There was no golden fork. And the corpse decayed so quickly, and the stench grew so unbearable, that the surgeons abandoned the procedure before it was complete. Even his fellow physicians, the record notes, could not endure the examination. So what was wrong with Tarrare? Modern doctors have guessed at hyperthyroidism, or damage to the amygdala or hypothalamus, the brain's hunger switches, or some malformation that still has no name. No case quite like his, in sheer degree, has ever been documented since. And that is precisely why some historians treat parts of the story with suspicion. It survives mainly through Percy's memoir and later retellings, written in an era that loved a marvel and rarely fact-checked one. The cat, the gallows, the 20 paces of stench, any of these may have grown in the telling. But somewhere beneath the legend there was a real young man, mild, pitiable, and hungry in a way no one on earth could fix, whom armies used, doctors studied, and history remembers only as an appetite. He asked, exactly once, to be cured. No one ever could. If you want more forgotten history that sounds made up but isn't, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.